Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the CIS podcast. I'm here with my good friend Ross King, and today we're talking about the 4 ingredients. Well, we're talking about number 2, and I don't know why. We're just going in reverse order because why not go in reverse order? But going through these 4 ingredients. So, Ross, what are we going to cover today?
Today we'll talk about work ethic, and you keep giving numbers to these, and I don't know that I've ever put them in that order. I think you just heard me say it one time, and you were like, "That's the order," and I'm like, "I don't know if that's the order." But
yeah, I can't help it. My brain's like, I must have order, or else I will go to sleep.
Well, I need that in my life, so that's good. No, I have said in the other 2 podcasts, I gave this list, but I'll give it again here in case we have a first-time listener or just as a refresher, that I feel like there are 4 general things necessary, 4 general ingredients to the recipe of creative success, especially in songwriting, and they are raw talent, work ethic, suck meter, and how are you in a room? And we've covered suck meter and how are you in a room. And this week we're going to talk about work ethic. Basically, this is pretty intuitive. I mean, anyone can guess. Ross just means work a lot, and learn to work hard. And that is generally it. But I mean, of course, we've all heard these kinds of, sort of hip, trendy work phrases like work smarter, not harder, and that kind of stuff. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think working smarter is in this field. And I just basically want to talk and have you talk about the way you and I work and what we've found to be productive. Maybe talk about some ways in which some of the work we've done, wasn't all that helpful or wasn't as effective as it could have been. Generally speaking, I just want to talk about kind of my workflow and yours.
No, I think that's great. And it's true. Like, I think the point and the value in listening to this kind of thing is that you learn from people who have done it. And, I'm sure that you've made just as many, probably not as many as me, mistakes along the way, or not even mistakes, just like, oh, well, I did that way for so long. And I probably could have skipped some steps if I would have just like not maybe poured as much into that and maybe more into that. So it's just a matter of like, how do you figure out, because, my idea and kind of like the hooky catchphrase of this is like, what does the work ethic take to go pro? Like, because we both are professionals at this. So that means whatever work ethic we've done for our own experiences has caused us to be able to do this professionally. So I feel like that's something that anyone listening is going to be like, well, yeah, I want to know, like, what do I actually, now we might not be able to give the exact step because obviously each of our journeys is different, but like, what kind of things did you have to lean into? And I feel like that's where the money is at, is like, not so much like you got to work hard and practice makes perfect and all those fortune cookie wisdom, I call it cheese wisdom, but like, what did you actually do? What did we actually do to make this thing work?
Well, and I think part of the struggle for all of us, because I've been a professional at this for a while, but I've had seasons of my life where I was doing other things, side hustles and stuff like that. And you've obviously done the same thing. You transitioned only a few years ago from someone paying you to do music to you having your own entrepreneurial thing. And one of the struggles is that, it's like athletics. It's like anything where you're going from something that a lot of people do as a hobby to transitioning into doing that thing professionally, which usually narrows it a lot, right? Usually it's like how many people play a sport for a living versus how many people play a sport really well, right? And that and there's a massive bottleneck there, right? So but one of the struggles is that you have to work and perform and execute like a pro before you're a pro. Right? Occasionally people get discovered or get some kind of break, because this isn't all about, it's not just a meritocracy. It's not all about talent, right? There are other things.
Sure.
But you have to kind of start working like a pro. And a lot of times you're like, well, I have a job. How am I going to do that? How am I going to do as much work as Ross and Brian do when this is how they make a living? And we could get into, when you feel like God has called you to take some leap. And I'm sure you and we could do a whole other podcast on the day or the moment or the season of life when we thought, I've got to go from treating this like a hobby I care about a lot to a risky sort of financially dangerous thing where I'm going to step out. And for me, that was literally stepping out of college. Like I did that from the beginning. So before I was married, before I had kids, I was already trying to work like a pro. And that I'm so grateful now, right? But most folks, that's not true. It wasn't true for you. It's not true for most people. I want to make sure we don't give people burdens they can't carry, right? So I don't want to say, hey, person who has a 40-hour or 50-hour a week job and a marriage and children and all those things, you should be doing exactly what Brian and Ross are doing, because that's the only way you'll make, because that isn't fair to them, because that's not possible or sustainable. And it's actually not even a good way to live. I would even say, just like spiritually, you and I both talked a lot about, like John Mark Comer's book, the ruthless elimination of hurry. He's all about, don't hurry so much. Don't be so frantic. So I don't want to add those kind of burdens to people just because, oh, well, if you want to go pro, you got to do this. So I want to talk a little bit about quality of work, about a certain direction of work, about certain ways we can implement that work into our normal life, even if you have a job. All right. So that's a lot. I don't know if we'll get through all that today, but let me just start by kind of giving my general, the way I approach this. And then if you want to speak to it too, that'd be fine. But I'm a very disorganized person by nature. And so I work really hard to have organizational tools in place. You and I both work on Kajabi platform, which we love, for our website. And it has a very organized sort of template set up, and you've helped me a lot, to work on that. But that has kind of, that's part of my workflow. I'm very dependent on Google Calendar. I'm very dependent on alerts on my phone and through Google and all those things. I mean, I do a lot of stuff that says, Ross, here's how your week is going to go. Be sure and do this. Yeah. So that's not very sexy or interesting, but that's something that if you need to be a person who uses your own self-awareness to kind of say, hey, do you need this in order to work? But I look at my week, on a Sunday or on a Saturday or on the Friday before or on a Monday morning. I look very specifically at my week. I look at commitments I have with my family. I've got 3 teenagers, 4 kids total right now, so I have a lot of driving that I have to do to help with the family. We have some various therapy and other extracurricular type activities that we're involved with. So I have to lay out all that in addition to my work, but I have all that laid out on my calendar. And then I tell myself, here's when I'm going to work deliberately in this way. Like even today, you and I were going to meet at a certain time, and I texted you about an hour ago and I said, hey, I'm in the middle of something creatively that's working. So can I push back a few minutes? And because there are things in our schedules that are, this is when this has to happen. Right. And there are other things that are kind of flexible. And if you're creative, you're going to have to be a kind of person who has, columns and rows that you stick to, but also that you learn to kind of say, creativity, inspiration has hit me. I have a window here. I'm going to chase this thing. All that to say, I lay out my week very specifically with here's when I'm going to work on this, on that. And I have things like, I'm going to write here by myself. I'm going to write here with other people. Those are scheduled things that are already on the calendar. I'm going to work on administrative, non-musical things here. I'm going to, send out merchandise orders here because, I don't get a ton, but I get a few times a month, I get people ordering shirts or CDs or whatever else. I'm going to work on that stuff. I am going to correspond with people who are hosting me for concerts or worship stuff. Today, I have a phone call at about 2:30 with a guy who's hosting me in a few weeks for a gig. I just put it all really scheduled. And I say all of this, it's probably obvious, but I say all this because as a way of example, sometimes some musicians are very organized, and that makes them less likely to try hard to be intentional, right? So this is counterintuitive, but I actually am super deliberate about my workflow because I know I'm a disorganized person. And I know that if you just give me an open field, I'm just going to goof off and do the most fun things. It's going to be kind of that joke about a squirrel. I'm just going to be whatever's shiny, I'm going to chase that. And I'm a person who sort of mentally I stack, right? So literally and figuratively, I'm dealing with stacks. So whatever's the top of the stack, whatever's I'll just chase that. So I say this because as an example, my wife is super organized. Her brain is a spreadsheet with color coding and all of that. So sometimes she actually sort of marvels at, oh, you're already doing this thing that I'm having to learn to do. She's taking this class on productivity and it's they're telling me to do blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I do that. And she's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I have to do that. I don't do it because I'm smart. I do that because if I don't do that, I will not get things done. Right. So I just want to just throw this out there that you need to do a sort of a personal assessment of how much more organization, how much more deliberate color coding and alarm setting and alert setting do you need to do in your life so that your workflow happens. Because some folks, you don't have a ton of time. So you need to make sure that you are setting your alarm, setting up your life in such a way where I can work in this slot. And when that hits, I'm going to be ready to work. And I'm going to work on my craft then, because that's the time of day, the time of week that I can do it. Does that make, do you do stuff like this?
Total. You have to. I remember I went to this thing called Experience Conference. It's a worship leader conference down here in Orlando. I don't know if they still do it. I think they probably do, but I went back in 2014 to 2015, and there was this fella speaking named Jason Ingram, and probably most people listening know who Jason Ingram is, but this is a while ago now, but he was just as prolific then as he is now. But I remember him giving a talk about songwriters and being like, he's obviously a professional songwriter. I feel like he's like John Wesley of like our generation, honestly.
Yeah.
But he was saying, and this is a quote people have probably heard before, but like, if you're a songwriter, show me your calendar and I'll tell you if you're a songwriter. And that applies directly to what you're saying. It's like, if you want to be a professional musician or entrepreneur, whatever this is, like your calendar is going to tell me if you are not. Now, to what you're saying, like, it's not like if you have 50 hours you have to work, like that's obviously the way that you're going to feed your family, and that's most important. But if no matter what time spacing you have, whatever margin you have, then it's just as much, if not more critical, to get that on the calendar. You're like, hey, like I got to work, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, whatever it is, 9 to 6. But like on Thursday night, if you check my calendar, I'm doing a Zoom co-write from 8 to 10, and it's on my calendar because I'm being intentional. And honestly too, like, I feel like this might just be me and my own brain, but like practically speaking, like when you can see something on a calendar, that makes it real for you too. It's like, oh wait, I am doing something. I am, 30 minutes on Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to be pushing on social media or something, whatever, connecting with someone. Like I can look at my own calendar and say, I am after this thing. And two, like something I thought was kind of cool. You said it was like, kind of tying together, like, how are you in a room? Like you were speaking of like other rooms you're in with other people, but also how are you in a room with yourself and like your own story? Like you are writing down what you're going to be doing, even if you're in your studio all day because you're doing all kinds of creative work. Like you're still in that room and you have to be organized, or else, like it says in the Bible, like if you don't have a vision, you'll perish. Like you have to have a plan in place or else nothing will get done, because honestly, it just feels too overwhelming. Because if you showed people your calendar this week, they probably like, that's probably as much as I've done in the past like 6 months in my music journey, but only because, for one, you've been doing this for a while, and two, like you have to have that organization baked in, or else you'll just like chase squirrels all day, like you said.
Right. Well, and again, some of this is going to be so technical and not creative, what we're going to say, because this is about making space for your creativity. And sometimes the non-creative work, this sort of sweaty, laborious, non-creative work allows you to have the other work, right?
Right.
So much of the entrepreneurial and creative person's life is trade-offs, and so you are doing admin work to make room for creative. You are doing dispassionate creativity work to make room for the passionate creative, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. But even stuff like when I on my Google Calendar, and I'm not selling Google. It's a good calendar.
This episode brought to you by Google.
Man, I wish if they want to sponsor us with their evil corporate money, I will take it. But on the calendar, when you set something up, it gives you this option for notifications. All right. And it's got like, do you want to be notified with a little ping? Do you want to with the email, whatever? But it also has a time. And I have this thing where I essentially give myself the day before at around dinner time, I tell myself to tell me about the next day's thing. And the reason is I have found that if I get reminded of this, meeting I'm going to have, this co-write I'm going to have, this thing I need to be doing, especially if I have to get kind of ready for it, or if I feel like this is an important creative endeavor, I give myself about 15, 16 hours from the day before to think on it, because I will just kind of get my mind around it. And so if it's a co-write with a certain artist, I'll have already been thinking about it, but that's a reminder to be like, hey, keep on your mind what kind of what kind of artist this is, what their music is like, what they're looking for. Look back over if there's a brief that you have. If I'm going to be in the studio with, for my stuff, I will kind of make sure I got my ducks in a row so I'm not wasting anyone else's time. I will formulate my ideas for the day before, and I'll have this kind of 4 or 5 hour window before I go to bed, and of course a couple of 2 or 3 hours before the meeting the next morning that I can think on it. And so I'll have usually a 14, 15, 16 hours ahead notification for that 10 a.m., that 9 a.m. And then I'll have about an hour ahead notification. So I set those because it just mentally I want to be prepared, because I just don't. There used to be kind of a running joke about Nashville. You walk into a songwriting room and it's like, what do you want to write? What do you want to write? And I refuse to do that. Like, I mean, of course you may ask that question, but I'm saying I refuse to just be like, well, I don't know. Like, I'm going to come in with stuff. I'm going to have ideas. I'm going to have preparation.
Specific ideas for that.
And they may not work. Often, right. I would say they mostly aren't the idea that gets chased. The ideas that I bring in, but they spark ideas. They display, a preparedness, a certain amount of care, right? And again, this is about stuff that's collaborative, right? It is not, a lot of our stuff isn't collaborative, but I'm just saying that kind of, mentally the day before, the evening before, 14, 15, 16 hours prior, I'm going to say, be thinking about this tomorrow. And that helps me to have my work not just be like because listen, I'm sure you're the same way. You and I've had these conversations. We are in a crucible season of life, both of us, with stress and kids and demands and all mental health issues, things that we're working through, hard stuff. Okay. We're not suffering, but I'm saying you and I both have been honest about, hey, it's just tough season.
Heavy times.
And so if I don't intentionally prepare, you're going to get whoever it is, you're going to get what I've left. You're going to get my momentary responses. And that's nobody wants that. Right. And I don't want that, because I don't have time to what if this is a meeting? Like I have a write tomorrow. It's a well-known artist. And I kind of saw that he was pursuing me online in some sort of random ways. So I called my old publishers who I still work with some and said, hey, this guy's kind of pursuing me online. Let's just see if he wants to write. We've never written together. Well, then, I chase that. So it's not, he's not a huge deal, but it's an important write for me. It's a first impression. So I have been thinking about it. I pinged myself a couple of days prior. Be thinking about this. Work on that ideas you want to bring. Whatever. Listen to his catalog. That kind of stuff. So that's all I'm saying is that I try to get myself for the work. I prepare for the work depending on what it is. And look, this can scale down to, I have a free day tomorrow to write for me. And my write, I'm not assigned to, I'm not an important artist. Okay. I'm just a person who's writing songs. Still, scale this to that. You want to maximize that time, because the way you're going to work like a pro is to execute in the ways that a pro would execute. We are telling you as pros, we're not bragging. It's just, this is our real jobs. That's the only definition of professional. It's our real job. This is how we do it. And I do this thing like this. I set alarms. I make sure I talk about it to myself. Ross, this is what's tomorrow. Are you prepared? Okay, get prepared. That may be really simple. I'm saying it because I've learned that not everyone thinks like that. That's intuitive to me now, because that's the only way I know how to work. But I don't know if it's intuitive to everyone else. So I want to make sure I say it.
Well, it's so critical because, we talk about the overwhelm thing and everyone's like, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And I don't know what to start with or whatever. But when I look at same exact thing that you do, I use iCal, but it pops up in my top right corner. Tomorrow, this is happening. And then even 15 minutes from now, this is happening. So I had someone in the studio earlier today. So I knew that was going to happen. I also started a production today, and then I knew that we were meeting today. My whole calendar, every day, I've got 2, 3, whatever the case may be, so that I know that what I'm into. And otherwise, because if you don't do that, then you're just going to be overwhelmed because you don't know what, I know exactly what I'm going to be doing this week. And two, and something that I think is really critical and something I've been really, really terrible at is that it's okay and needed to actually schedule out, if need be, not doing anything or doing the thing that got you into this mess in the first place, whatever that is for you. One of the things, I got into this whole thing because I just love writing songs and eventually recording songs, and I never do it anymore because I'm constantly working on other people's stuff, which is that's the job. But
Right.
so making intentional for me, like you and I next week, we're going to work on some things for both ways, but it's like, that is work. It's on my calendar. It's during the work week, but it's also not everything has to be output. We need to input too, because
Right.
that is critical to actually having, like you said, if you give everyone your leftovers, eventually they're not going to be hungry for it anymore because it's just old, disgusting food or something. I don't
Right.
know.
No, and I get it. I mean, and at some level, you're talking a little bit about the idea of like Sabbath and rest. And I think we'd be doing a disservice to folks if we didn't mention that over the banner over all of this is that, I wrote a song about this. If the Lord doesn't build the house, the laborers are building in vain, right? So this idea that like we can work and work and work and work and literally work in vain because we're just we're so obsessed with pushing our thing forward, building our own kingdoms, all that. And I want to make sure that what I'm saying is that this is about being a good steward of the time that I have and the resources I have and the energy that I have. But at the end of the day, you have to make space. We've actually been deeply convicted in our family about this idea of like Shabbat, Sabbath, that we don't really do it the way that we should. And so I would encourage all of you, just like I encourage me, to make sure you study and understand that this is an important part of it's an essential part of our week, that we step back. Because here's the funny thing about work and about rest. We think rest is to not do anything.
Right.
We think rest is to like, just, not work. Okay. And that is part of it. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is in the biblical times in the Old Testament, they would actually do things like give your field, your crop field a year to rest, right? Which it doesn't need rest. What it's doing is when you're doing that, what you're saying is, I'm going to take a year or a week or a day, and I'm not, and I'm going to prove that only God can make this work. Wow. Right. So rest isn't just, am I not working? It's, am I pushing my thing forward? Right. Or am I letting God push it forward? And I've always joked about this, but we hate rest so much in America that we came up with paid vacations. Wow. Think about this.
Yeah.
Guys, you can stop working, but don't worry, we're still going to pay you.
Isn't that
interesting? Don't worry, we'll still make sure your bills get paid. And whereas actually, and I'm not saying that's bad. What I'm saying is real rest would be, Lord, pay my bills. I'm taking a break for a whole day, for a whole week. I'm pay my bills, Lord. Right? That's what the Lord meant by rest. Right? Was just stop trying to push it forward. So let me just say that you can work and work and work and push your thing forward. And at some point you won't care about the Lord and his power and his provision in your life. And we've all been there. But so this is not that. This is us saying, if you work smart enough, you can rest and relax and stop pushing your thing forward, right? But if you want to talk about people that I sort of sniff out and get suspicious of fastest, it's people who act like workaholism is cool. That I got zero interest in people like that. And that's a problem in professional ministry. You and I have both been in professional ministry. There's a lot of problems with when to pastors rest and the abuse of church staff situations and all that. But anyway, I just want to make sure I just briefly mentioned that this idea of Sabbath, deliberate rest, should be tied to this whole thing. I want to briefly talk about one part of this because I think that we could probably list different enemies to like a good work ethic or productive work ethic, but to me the primary one would be time wasting or effort wasting. Like I don't want to put my time and my effort into things that don't work. So I want to talk briefly about one concept that I teach my students, and that's the idea of like what I call jigs and thresholds. And so this is weird, but I do some woodworking. I'm not very good at it, but I like to do woodworking, and it's one of my sort of recreational, creative things. On a weekend, wherever I might build things or fix things or whatever. There's a concept in woodworking called jigs, and so the idea is that a jig is something you usually have to make so that you can make other things with it. Or faster. For those who are watching this on YouTube, they'll be easier to follow. But I have a table saw, and the way that a table saw works is it's a flat table surface, and right in the middle is this saw blade that you can kind of crank up and down. You can turn it to different angles and stuff, right? But what you do is you take a piece of wood and you lay it on that flat surface, and you push the wood through this stationary blade that's that's turning, right? And so when you push it, it is sawing that thing in half. But the problem is you got to keep your hands super straight, right? Because if not, that cut can get wobbly. So there's a jig you can make called a table saw sled, because the table saw has these two little like 1 inch kind of divots, these little ditches in it. We build this thing that basically has pieces of wood that fit those divots. And you set that thing on your table, and then you have a little piece of wood that's sort of like going perpendicular to the saw, right? Then you can set things in that sled, in those runners, those ditches, and slide it, and it won't move at all, right? And that's complicated. If you're not watching this, that speech might have been complicated, and I apologize. But all I'm trying to say is, one day I was so tired of making crooked cuts that I said, I got to build a table saw sled. And I built, and it took me all day to make this cool table saw sled. And I couldn't cut anything else that day.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't make anything that day but the jig. I lost a day. Then I could cut so fast. So I gave up a day to do something that made me faster in the long run. Okay. And we need to be people who employ jigs. Okay. So a jig would be, every time I try to do this kind of songwriting, my guitar playing, which is pretty mediocre or whatever, gets in my way. Maybe it's my picking. All right. So you may have to take one of your creative days and just put this hand on the strings and this hand by the sound hole and just kind of go, right? Just work on your picking patterns, right? All day long, or for a couple hours. You might lose a day of creativity because you need to learn how to pick better. Or maybe on the piano, your left hand is slowing you down. And you're trying to sell these ideas to your friends, and you're trying to get these songs going, but you just can't quite get them there. Or you may need to sit down and watch a YouTube video on how to build a track, or go to Brian's stuff, and build how to do simple. That is a jig you're going to need to spend some time constructing, so that your workflow is better later. And the second part of that, I know you just I'll give you the other part just real quick, is thresholds. And it's tied to this. And so there's a productivity concept called thresholds, and it's really simple. And it just says, how high is the threshold that you got to get over to do something? So a really simple one would be, I have a keyboard that I like playing. It's in the same room where my wife does crafts or something. And or it's in the same room that I have my tools or whatever. And so when I go in there, I have to get the keyboard out of the closet, blah, 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 and I've put it over this and plug in this thing. Or I like to write songs, but I like it in a quiet room. So I have to go and make sure it's a certain day where no one's at home. These are all thresholds, all right? So there's a threshold between, right now I'd like to write a song, and right now I'm writing a song. There's a threshold in between them. Is my room quiet? Can I get to the keyboard? Is it plugged in? Can I get sound out of it? Can I move the stuff around? Do I have a place to sit? Those are simple, but I'm saying you might have these thresholds. When you have thresholds, and some of you are thinking about this right now, you're like, oh, every time I try to go do this thing, I have this problem, right? And I would say, if you have thresholds getting in the way of your creativity, you got two choices. You spend your next time building a jig or lowering that threshold, or you stop doing that thing. Period. That's it. That's all you can do, because you're going to be so angry if you keep doing it the exact same way with the same high threshold. My most practical example I can give of this is that I years ago learned Ableton, which is a DAW. It's great. I love Ableton. I spent a bunch of time on it. I loved it. And Ableton's primarily, for me, was used to do things with samples and MIDI. So I did my whole kids album I did several years ago. I did it on my Ableton rig. But Ableton at the time wasn't very good for recording things with microphones. Okay. It was really only good. It was best as a sampler MIDI. And so when I got great at it doing MIDI on it. But on Pro Tools, I actually didn't like the MIDI in the sampling stuff. I just like recording stuff. So if I did a cool MIDI thing, I'd have to dump it down to stems, which those of you who know what this is, pull them over to Pro Tools, import them into Pro Tools, then I'd record and sing and play my guitar and stuff. Then I'd be like, oh, wait, I don't like that drum sound. Go back over to Ableton, right? Okay, so you can see how this would be maddening, right? So I was building stuff and having so much fun in two different DAWs, two different formats, and they weren't. So finally I was like, you know what? I'm just going to quit doing Ableton. I'm going to go over to Pro Tools. I'm going to learn how to do MIDI. And look, Pro Tools is not great still in the list of DAWs in terms of like MIDI and all that, but I knocked out hours of lack of productivity because I learned how to do MIDI in Pro Tools. I could have ditched Pro Tools and gone over to Ableton. Now Ableton's really honestly a good DAW all the way around. But at the time I was like, no, I'm better at Pro Tools. I'm going to go there. So that was me lowering a threshold. But it took me several days of not recording, of not creating, just learning how to do in Pro Tools what I could do in Ableton. Okay? That's a choice that I made, and now I'm fully functional in Pro Tools for those things. So lots of information there, but give me feedback.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have a couple of examples. One is very meta to this actual podcast, and another is something that I built my own jig in my own production-y way, is I program drums a lot. Sometimes I get real drummers, but a lot of times I'm programming drums. So in Logic, there's something called Drum Machine Designer. And so basically it's just a drum sampler, and I would go in, and for each project, I would grow and open up Drum Machine Designer and drag in the different samples I thought would stack. And typically, I'm working with 2 to 3 kicks, probably 3 to 4 snares, multiple layers of each instrument to create a custom kind of sound. So as you can imagine, that would probably take a lot of time to do for every project, building custom kits. And then like about 3 years ago, which I wish I would have said this 10 years ago, but 3 years ago, I discovered that you could save presets in Logic for every sound that you have, from vocals to synths to drums. So then I started to name these custom kits. So now I have all of these jigs that whenever I am going to, and it's especially cool when I'm working with the same artist on multiple songs, because I'm like, hey, let's pull up Brooklyn kit. And then we've got her drum kit. And of course, you're modifying it, but that would take me 20, 30 minutes each one. But instead, it's instantly there, So it took the time of, now, it's not like that was wasted time necessarily, because a lot of those tracks I did create a preset out of it. But because so many people, specifically with drums and people producing, they're like, man, I don't know how you get the drums. It seems so difficult, so time consuming. That was like a major thing, because not only does it save the sounds, but it also saves like the channel strip. So like the same EQ comes up, the same, saturation comes up. Everything is custom there, and you can do it with everything. So you can imagine when you're working on your demos, some people just use the entire session as a, so all the stuff's built in or whatever. But that's a massive jig when it comes to specifically with production or doing your demos or whatever. It's like, use presets, because that will save you tons and tons of time. And then my meta example of this is when we first started recording the first episode of you and I a few weeks ago, we were starting to use Zencaster. And the first time we did it, we recorded our audio separately, and then we sent it over, and then I lined them up and whatever. But now, episode 3, we're kind of dialing this in. So the editing side is like 5 times faster probably to have this episode all done and ready to go, because, we're getting framed up better as we're doing it. And sometimes, so I'm saying that because sometimes you can't just build a jig right away. You might actually have to learn how to build a jig before you can build a jig, but it's so worth it, like you said, because like especially if your time's limited, you want to have as little friction between you and getting what you get done. Because I remember the first time you talked to me about this was with my actual setup, because like this is my scene. Anytime anyone sees me on the internet, they see me sitting here with my panels behind me in the same window, the same couch, whatever. Now it has evolved over time, but essentially at any moment I can come in here, plug in, I have my mic, my SM7 set up, like how I want it to be. Everything is here. I make sure I'm framed up right, and I can record any kind of content I need to without having to like redo everything. Because that was definitely not the case in the past. So yeah,
and that required time and probably some money.
Yeah.
It required some wasted time where you weren't able to be creative. Gosh.
Totally.
And now you can do it. And look, I admire your like sort of thresholdless thing here, because I still like, I'm trying to get this figured out, but I still, it's a good bit of like work for me, to do this sort of video audio lineup thing. I mean, I bought they can't see, I think I talked about this in the last podcast, but there's a light above my head and this mic here, and there's a little thing that they can't see, but it holds a phone. If I need to do a phone, and it's 3 or 4 different arms. And I bought this thing. It's a couple $100. I bought it because I was like, I need to have an easy way to be on video, doing audio, filming myself, whatever. But even then, I told you today before we got on the podcast, my desk setup is kind of a mess still. Like this helped it a ton. But all that to say, it may be a financial investment you got to make. It may be a time investment you got to make. It may require some watching something, learning, reading something, and none of that feels creative, right? But so much of my career is because I learned something or because I gave up some time here to gain some time there. And again, when your time is precious, when you have a full-time job, when that's going to feel like a waste, but I'm telling you, this is meant to get you got to play a long game here. You've got to be thinking, all right, I was going to use Saturday to write, and I'm going to instead like learn how to do this basic demo stuff in Pro Tools or in Logic or whatever. Just do it. Look, here's where you start. Ask yourself, what is the most frustrating part of my creative process consistently? What's the most consistent frustration in my creative process? Answer that question, and then either build a jig or build or buy or whatever, learn something. Whatever you got to do, lower that threshold or stop doing that thing. If the answer to that question involves something that you can't fix without really disrupting your life, well, just don't do that thing anymore, right? Maybe you need to stop trying to play keys when you're writing. Maybe it's just too hard because whatever this is. Maybe you need to stop trying to build demos. There was a period of my life where I thought, I'm decent enough at building demos. I'm going to do it more. And I'm just so slow at it. I just don't do it anymore. So now like you've gotten 5 or 6 clients from me who are students of mine who are like, hey, Ross, can you build a demo? And I'm like, yes, I can build a demo, but Brian will do it faster and better and not be really charging you much more than me. And it'll be way better. And, and I'll have my time freed up to go do whatever I'm actually good at.
That's a great point though, is like, sometimes, like for instance, I just released Morning by Morning, and when you said keys, it reminded me of this. Like, I am trying my best to be proficient enough on the piano, at least, to play through songs, because I just want the dynamics, and I basically will just put everything in the key of C, transpose it or whatever, and cheat. It's like a capo on keys, how I look at it. But at the end of the day, like, if it's like a important part, and this is like with Susan's song, the sailing song, like if I know that it's a piano, like needs to lead this song, I know that, I can keep working, and I will keep working at getting more proficient at playing piano for real. But at the same time, my friend Jonathan Jackson can do it in 2 seconds. I just need to pay him a little bit of money, and then he'll do it 20 times better than I ever could.
And so then your client's happier.
Exactly, because the song is better.
And your work's easier. The work you do is easier.
Right. I just take it and drop it in my sessions like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I hoped that I could play, and he just did it in 3 hours. So there is that element too, and that's always a balance of like, we need to get as good as many things as we can, but at the same time, sometimes it does benefit to just lean on somebody else who's already spent the time.
Goals. Look, we say this every week, but it goes back to goals. If your goal is to be good at all the things, okay, then just do that. But that goal may not match output. Right. If your goal is best output, then you may have to you may have to get rid of a goal of, I want to play all the instruments. Right. Or I want to write all the parts or whatever else. If Susan, our example, is this really talented songwriter that we both worked with, Susan Brown. She's awesome. But Susan's not a great singer, and she knows that. She's a terrific piano player and a great songwriter, but not a great singer. She knows that. She talks about it. Okay, so it's not me bagging on Susan, but she is. If her goal was, I have to be the one to present every single thing. Well, okay, that would be a certain kind of thing. But Susan's thing is, I want the best product. So she will often play the piano because she's great at it. She will write all of it because she's a great writer. Then she'll get someone else to sing it because that's makes for the best thing. Her goal isn't Susan sings everything. Her goal is great Susan products. Right? Great, putting out really great stuff. And she's doing it because she's humble enough and self-aware enough to devote herself in the right places. Now, it doesn't make it wrong for you, whoever you are, if you're like, well, I want to be a better singer. I want to do my songs. I don't like when other people sing that. Look, I had this struggle. When I first started doing this years ago in college, I was a mediocre singer. So I would literally, I forgot this until just now, that years ago when I first started doing this, I would get my friends who were good singers, and I would say, hey, can you sing this for me? And I would pay for studio time. And I'd go in with my song. And every time I'd be like, they're not really doing it right. Now, looking back, sometimes I was wrong about that because I didn't understand a lot of this, but I just made it a goal. You know what, Ross, just become a better singer. Just work at it. And so I worked at it. And so I'm still an okay singer, but I know how to do my stuff. Right.
Right.
And this goes back to, when I'm writing for like CECM, I'll have moments when I bring a certain idea in that I've sung a certain way. And I show it to the artist. I'm like, they're not singing it the way I thought they would sing it, and I got to decide, do I let this go or whatever. It's about goals. So if your goal is to get the most done, then you got to like figure out where the deficits are in your productivity for you to get the most done. If your goal is a certain level of excellence, that's different than a certain amount of output. It's a quantity, quality thing, whatever, right? Whatever your goal is, match your workflow for that goal, period. And one of my goals is that when I'm sit down to write a song, I don't have anything in my way to do that. So sometimes, and I do this even now, I've done this in the last year, I have taken an hour to work on a picking pattern on my guitar that I've like, this is the kind of pattern that this needs. I've done this in the last year. I've sat down at the piano and worked on my left hand because I'm a really kind of a bad piano player. But I was working on that song, Believe in the Desert, from my record. And I wrote it on the piano, and I wanted to do kind of this little real kind of like vibey. It ended up not even really having that on the song, but I wanted it to be this vibey piano thing. And I worked and worked to play with my right and left hand the way I wanted to play, just so I could show it to Ben and Mark the way I wanted to show it, and that's just, that wasn't part of creativity. That was just work. So there's going to be, there's going to be times like that, and it's going to feel like it's robbing you of your very limited amount of time. But ultimately, if you do this right, this is investing in a way that makes your muscle memory is going to be engaged later. You're going to have a lower threshold. You're going to have this easy on ramp, instead of sort of symbolically sitting in traffic to get on the freeway every single time. You're going to have this easy little traffic free on ramp to get on that freeway because you sat in traffic so long for a day or two.
I love it. And I think it's really cool how the approach of this is like when you first see a work ethic, we're going to talk about like how to do stuff. But really what we've been talking about is actually more in the preparation, right? It's all about how do we pre-work so when it's actually time to do the thing? And it really makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because like creativity is something that needs to be unhindered. If it has all this stuff, because like there's been many days where I'm coming in here to do some music production thing, and I know that it might be a Melodyne day, which Melodyne is not at all. It can be creative, I suppose, but like it's not really fun to do when you're going through, doing vocal editing. It's just not. I mean, some guys might love that, and that's amazing. I'm not one of those guys, but I know that taking the time, hour or two, whatever it is, to do the lead vocal right and Melodyne it and tune it and time it will result in an incredible representation of that singer and the song as a whole. So it's always, so that in a micro way is, building the jig every time is like, yeah, it's not fun to do that. But and the same thing for you, if you're producing demos or whatever you're doing, whatever, writing, whatever, it's like spending the extra time will result in pulling away from that frustration, because nothing is worse than like skipping all the steps and maybe getting to where you're going faster and then realize it's just a pile of junk and you have to go back in and do like surgery on it, or else it's going to be worthless. Like take the little extra time. And I feel like that is definitely the attention to detail is difference too between amateur and professional, is saying, okay, I know that that's going to take me another half an hour to do that right. But in the grand scheme of things, it's probably going to save me 10 hours and it's going to be a much better project because of that little bit of extra 30 minutes or whatever in the grand scheme of things. Right.
And the line, though, the real moment of growth and discernment is when you have these times when you say it's going to take an extra 30 minutes and it's going to be great, or it's going to take an extra 7 or 8 hours and it's not going to be still all that great. And that's when you got to like not do that. Like, I think that's what I want to make sure that we make clear here is this doesn't mean get good at everything that you're not good at. It's not what this means. What we're saying is if you have access to the goal that you have and it's going to require some sacrifice to get that goal, do the extra work, but be humble enough to know when no amount of work is going to be right, and you're going to be robbing your energy and your time in some ways that are going to hurt your creativity in the long run, right? So you have to be able to see the difference there, and that's going to take some time. You need to get critique from people. You need to be around other people who do this. That's why part of the beauty of CIAS is that you're this community of people with varying gifts. You need to look to those people sometimes. And there's a lot of relationships that even you and I don't know about that are going on in the CIAS community where people are sort of calling on each other. And that's one of the, I know that's part of the reason why you did this, you know, it's one of the beautiful parts of this, but we need to be people who are looking around and seeing how things are done and then saying, oh, I have a goal that's like that. Can I reach that goal with my own skill set and the time I have and the resources that I have, whatever. If you can't, get rid of the goal, or find a way to reach the goal with some investment, with some work. It's hard to know that exactly how to do that, but that is part of how you learn to be a pro. Because what we don't want to say, again, we don't want to say, look, me and Brian, you know, Brian cares about getting his vocals auto-tuned, melodined, and all of that perfectly. If you don't care about that, then don't do that. Mm-hmm. A great song can happen without that.
Yep.
But Brian is a producer. He wants to get good at that because it makes this, you know, slicker and more professional and more pristine product, more radio ready, right? Mm-hmm. But there are great artistic creations made in a much more raw, much more organic, much more unprocessed way. They're not better or worse. But if I am going to always start with a voice memo on my phone that if I ever lose this phone or die and someone gets a hold of this, it's an embarrassing pile of just like me singing, you know, terrible, you know, things. Acapella, you know, snapping in a car, right? There's tons of that. We all have that. But the point is, a lot of my creativity happens at that super raw, super unprocessed, not pro level. And then there's other creativity that I do that because of the specific goals for that thing is a lot more pro, a lot more fine-tuned, a lot more, you know, laser focused. And we need to have both in our lives. And I'll say it again. It's about the goal for that thing. If the goal for that thing is something pristine and radio ready, then you put the time in, you put the money, and you put the investment in to get it there. For goodness sakes, find out if it's radio ready. Don't assume. Ask people who know, and then get it ready. If the goal is just to create and just have this raw and beautiful, unsort of formed thing, great. Do that. Do it on your phone. Do it the cheapest way that you can, the quickest way that you can. This is why community is such a big part of this. You've got to find out from your friends, from your colleagues, you know, what parts of your output are working, what parts need refining, what parts don't. I'm going to give one more thought, and because I know we're probably reaching close to our time. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how I use free time sometimes to work, because this is kind of part of my prep. So I want to make sure my life isn't just work. All right, that's terrible. But if there are places where my work and my pleasure can kind of coexist that don't rob me of Sabbath, that, you know, that aren't little back-ended ways for me to like say, I'm really actually not resting at all, but I'm pretending like I'm resting, right?
Doing it for the Lord.
That's right. That's right. I don't want to be this liar, but I will say this. When I am on the way to rights, or on the way home from rights, or when I get a creative sort of germ seed kind of going in my brain, I'm not sure what to do with it, I will often engage media to kind of provoke and push along those things, right? So on the way to a write, I will, you know, I tell my students all the time, one of my routines is that in the car, before I'm going to write, whatever else, I pull up Spotify top pop playlist, top country, top songwriter, top Christian playlist, and I just kind of scroll through them. I may listen to only 30 seconds each of the songs. I'm getting a sense of what's the trends that are going on out there. I'm getting a sense of what kind of melodies are popping off. I'm getting a sense of what sort of production things are going on. All that's going to like feed my preparation so that I am constantly being sort of given a chance to process the different kinds of art that are relevant in the culture, that are successful. I am hearing from other professionals what's working. I would say that like part of my just normal not working, but on the way to work or even picking up my kids from stuff, I try to engage mostly music, but it's not just music. I also try to engage other media, not when I'm driving, but I try to engage other media podcasts. And if I'm home, I might try to engage little like trailers to see what trailer music is going on in the world. I will engage, you know, I'll like pull up, you know, what's NBC's fall preview 3-minute commercial using for music, you know, and whatever else. I am using my sort of passive time to be active, right? So I'm actively taking in media when I'm doing passive things, right? driving, whatever else, I am saying, how can I receive just some instruction, some low level instruction from the culture, from my industry? I'm the kind of person who would be fine in a silent car. Totally. And I sometimes am, just to give my ears a break. But sometimes I listen to music whether I want to or not, because it gives me a reminder of what's out there. It says, and I'll be honest, I usually, if I have a 20-minute drive to something and I engage just like general market pop, not even about Jesus, I will get ideas. Because I'll be like, oh, that lyric is about this, but it makes me think about this, and that melody went here, but I would have gone there, and that sort of time signature, or that beat, or that drum sort of structure reminds me of this and this and this, and I just have notes suddenly to go into my writes. I have notes for this one song I've had a lyric idea for this song for days, no clue what it's really supposed to be melodically. Then I'll hear some cool, time signature or vocal delivery or vibe, like, I wonder if I could take it into that kind of space. That's not stealing. That is letting the different things being created out in the world seep into my creativity and influence it. So part of my prep, part of my work is that I take these unexpected times and moments when I have a little bit of room in my brain, and I say, let's let some other stuff kind of inform me. Does that make sense?
100%. And that made me think of, like, when I co-write, I will basically always bring a track idea or two to top line to, and that's preparation, right? Like, I know who I'm going to write with, and then I'm like, okay, if I've written them before, or I might go onto their Spotify and I might listen to them if they're an artist, of like what they do, even down to like what key are a majority of their songs in, so we kind of start in their general vocal happy place, or what sounds like. So then when I come to the right, it's like we like you said, there's definitely a time, and I've experienced a lot of these writes where you're like, we'll sit down like, we have nothing, let's make something. And that's totally fine. And sometimes those are the best songs, but also if I come in with a track that's kind of pointed towards the room, like everyone's like, that's inspiring to me, and they've got like pages of lyrics or lines from the first playthrough, then guess what? The write's going to go really fast, which is not about speed, but also it's like the creativity is just flowing, and that's all
It's not about speed. You know what I mean?
Right.
At some level, the speed helps. Yeah.
Sure. And I mean, like, because if you get in and you're like, did we just like crank out a serious song that we all love in an hour and a half? Like, I think so. And like, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And because now I might have put an hour or two perhaps into the track before. So for me, that's 3 hours, 3.5, whatever. But like, I don't care, because I love, as far as like you said, like, how do you blend work and play? Well, I love sitting down and like cranking out. I get all inspired and I love doing that, So that like kind of is what we do for our virtual retreats now, is I'll just write all these track ideas, and like we have one in like a week and a half or so, and I need to create 4 tracks to bring to that, so we have options and stuff. So on my calendar, guess what? I've got those days and times where I'm going to start busting out those tracks for that retreat. And do I know if they're all going to work or everyone's going to love them all? No, but I know who's going to be there, and I know the general vibe. So I'm going to use, and to go with what you just said, I'm going to listen to Spotify, get references. Like if I want to have a couple of like worship tracks, I'm going to go see what's the top worship songs and catch a vibe that inspires and moves me, and then do something in that zone, and then bring that in. And then, that's how we can write 2 songs in a day and have amazing sounding demos, or 4 songs in it. You know what I mean? Like that's how that works. It's not because we're just sitting around like, it's like, we're coming to the party with a gift and we're ready to do something. It maximizes the time, and 2, it's just more fun that way. I mean, when you walk into a room and you've got some really cool, fresh lyric melody ideas because you just were inspired by something in the car, people are going to be like, oh, well, Ross is ready for this. I'm stoked by his stokedness, and like, let's run with that, but that's due to your preparation. So that just happen,
Right. And it's just it's deliberate, intentional stuff. And I don't want to over talk that, but one of the things that's interesting about creativity, and I don't think this is true for more left-brained or more purely physical things, but creativity breeds creativity. And so even with your story there, in making those 4 tracks, you're almost certainly going to come up with something that you're like, oh man, I kind of want to keep this for me or
Always.
whatever. I'm sure it does. Or it'll be like, oh, I kind of nailed that 80%, but now I know I can nail it 90, or whatever. And that's what a lot of this is that we're, maybe accountants finish doing a spreadsheet and go, man, I can't wait to do some more spreadsheets. Or maybe people who dig ditches think I just dug that ditch. I can't wait to now dig a bigger ditch. Maybe. I don't think that's true. Creativity, it's true. And I love that about it. And so I say, look, at the worst case, if you're doing this stuff and it's pushing your creativity, it's going to help give you more opportunities and more reasons and more excitement about further creative things. The last thing, sorry, I said last minute ago, but I had one more thing, and it's just kind of tied to, you and I have done these. We've done a couple of these month-long intensives, and we won't, go too much in this, but we did these two different things where we had about 6 or 8 students, participants, and we would meet on a Monday night, and we would talk a little bit, and I would give a prompt. And then, they'd have 7 days, they'd have a week to go and write based on this prompt. Yeah. And then we'd come back and do song shares and stuff. But the reason why I bring that up is because prompts have become a big part of my growth. And so the last thing I kind of want to say, this is probably one of those things that it's going to really help certain people and other folks are going to feel burdened by it. So I just want you to, as you hear this, I want you to receive it from the Lord as if it's a good thing for you or if it's not. But I give myself, even now, 25 years into this as my job, I give myself prompts, guardrails. I tell myself, let's try to write something like this. An example would be, and I share this example with my with the intensives was, years ago. So I'm married, and my wife's family is really generous, very gracious. They're wealthy. And they're really kind with their money. So they take us on these great trips. And we used to go all the time as a family to Colorado with all her siblings, her parents, all this. And they would rent a house for a week or two, and we could just stay there and all of us hang out together or whatever. And I would go if these were like 2-week trips, I'd be like, oh man, I'm a songwriter. I'm in Colorado. It's the mountains. I got to write amazing worship songs while I'm there. So I'd take my guitar and all that. Sorry. And
see,
I would just
there's
be like,
the calendar.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. No, I'd take my guitar and be like, oh, I got to write some kind of brilliant thing. And I just would struggle to write that, because I'd be intimidated by the mountains or because I'd be too busy having fun or something, And so one year I was like, I've never written a song ever in Colorado. When I go, I'm going to take my ukulele because it's a very just sort of childlike, sort of an unserious instrument, at least to people like me who aren't good at it. That's not to say it's not a very serious instrument. For me, I'm a very unserious ukulele player. So I took it, and instead of writing about the mountains, when we got there were pictures all over the wall at someone's. It was someone's house. It was pictures about Colorado and pictures with their family and pictures that they had purchased, obviously, just to have as decorative things. And I just through the week or so, I wrote songs about the pictures on the wall on my ukulele, and it was very easy because suddenly the pressure was off. All that to say, my prompt was ukulele. I'm not as good, so it's going to be different muscle, different ways I think, different kinds of engagement. Pictures on the wall instead of Colorado. I'm going to enjoy my Colorado when I'm out in the creation, and when I come in to be inside, I'm going to do something totally different. So I and this is one of them, but I wrote some great songs that that I love, and that had no real use, to be totally honest. They're not songs that the world's heard a lot of. They were just exercising the muscle. But they encouraged me. They provoked me onward to keep doing this. So I would just challenge you, give yourself guardrails, parameters, prompts. Say, I'm going to write this week based on, I'm going to go open an old hymn book and find a hymn that I've never heard. I don't know the melody of. I'm just going to take the words that are there and just try to write something. I'm going to, write something this week that I don't care about. Something that my kids tell me, something that my wife's going through, something that my spouse and I are dealing with. I'm going to write a song that maybe doesn't matter. I'm going to write a jingle for our intensives. We write camp theme songs. I'm going to write a camp, whatever. I'm going to write things I don't care about, just exercise the muscle, just to show I can. Because what will happen is you'll unlock parts of your brain that aren't usually used for songwriting. If you're a very serious, like when we did the first camp theme song, remember that a couple folks just could not get that silly. They couldn't make themselves be fun. Right. They were too serious. I'm like, hey guys, just have fun with this. And they were all cool. The songs ended up being all really cool. But there were a couple of them like, this isn't camp theme song. This is like a camp theme song for people who are like on ambient. This is like not really camp. And so it's, and so we have to give ourselves reasons to like push ourselves, right? And so that's part of the work ethic is if you just do what you do, if you're just responding all the time to what you already do, you're probably never going to grow into a pro writer. A pro writer can do things that are outside of their comfort zone, outside of their wheelhouse, outside of their basic area. And you got to always lean into what you're good at. But I'm saying be pushing yourself to these new, just to at least find out. Because I wouldn't have known I'm a good camp theme songwriter if I hadn't been pushed to do that.
Right. And I mean, like in a technical sense with a professional songwriter, producer, whatever, music creator, like you're a music maker, you're going to have, someone's going to say, hey, here's the brief. We need this song, or hey, here's the artist you're working with. Like, so that's like a real world. It's not just, I mean, sure, sometimes it is just to like flex yourself to a different spot in your head. But in a professional sense, I mean, probably more times than not, you kind of have a prompt. They don't call it a prompt. It's a brief, or it's an artist, or it's a, target album or whatever. But like, that's what you got to do. So like technique knows no genre, right? Like you bring technique to wherever you go,
That's
so
right.
like, that's why we do the camp theme songs. I know we talked about a bunch of CIAS things with the like, I will say this too, like I'm going to link it below. Get in, if you're not in our CIAS Facebook like group, get in there, because that's the place where you can find a sounding board. Now we like to make it to where everything is inspirational and encouraging to each other. Don't just post a song link, because if you don't care, then they're not going to care to listen. But if you say, here's what I'm after, here's what my target is, like we love listening to that stuff. And that's a great sounding board for that. So, just the link will be there to do that. If you're not in there, we'd love to see you in there. Preparation is key. I feel like that keeps coming up over and over again. It's like the difference, like you may not have a lot of time, but you can prepare no matter how much time you have. Even if you only have 10 minutes a week, which I know we all have more than 10 minutes a week, because if you decide to, I say I retired from Netflix in 2017 when I started doing this for real. And I watch Netflix now, but there was a lot of times where like any time I had outside of family, it was just for this. That was building my jig. You know what I mean? Like learning how to do Logic was built. I didn't know it at the time. I wish I was that smart and intentional. It just was happening because of God doing that, in my life. But like, I didn't watch any. People will be like, "Oh, did you see the new Netflix series?" Like, no, I didn't, because I was doing that. And not that I'm not being a jerk. It's just like, no, that's just what I did. And I'm so happy that happened, because now I can sit down and create a full production or a track that inspires other people to write songs for God or whatever. That if I hadn't spent that time, I wouldn't be able to offer that gift to that party. So,
and there are people who don't have that goal, and that's okay.
Totally.
It is okay if you have a season of your life where you're just stressed and tired and exhausted. Do not hear Ross and Brian saying, don't have any fun, just go work. It's about your goals. If you need to get some rest and some just like mindless escapism into your life right now, by all means, do that. Yep. Don't burden yourself with writing hit songs. Do not. But if your goal is, I want to get better at this, and I've got some margin in my life for it, then use that margin deliberately. Prepare, do the things that we've said in this last hour or so. And I think that all of us can get tons better at this. And again, I am 25, 28 years into this, 50 years old. I've been through multiple stages of my professional career, and I'm still working and learning and adjusting and pivoting, to use a cool word, at this season of my life. I'm still doing it because I have to. And, I'm a late bloomer a little bit. I'm learning stuff late, but part of why we're doing this podcast is we want you, the listener, to not have to wait so long. I have to make so many mistakes to get there. There's a lot of fun out there for us when we really learn how to be creative.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm going to pray, because that's all that's left to do.
Yeah, please.
So God, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for anyone listening to know that, this is not to overwhelm. This is not meant to say, if you're not doing this, then you won't get, because at the end of the day, it's a calling. We're just trying to help equip people to realize that if it's a calling, that we don't have to just completely drain ourselves, because when we do, like Ross said before, it's just all we can offer is our leftovers, that eventually we'll just get tired, and no one's looking for that. We want to do things that ultimately will draw people to you, and you deserve our best in everything we do. So when we take the time to admin our calendar and look at it and prepare for the things that you've put in our paths and that will make us better at this whole thing, God, it's an opportunity to actually get better and do better. And, at the end of the day, like it says in the Bible, your yoke is easy and your burden is light. So this doesn't have to be hard. This doesn't have to be this big struggle. This is hopefully advice that's setting people free to realize like, hey, I only have this much time in a week, but I'm going to approach it in this way to frame it up so that I can make the most out of every single second I have to do with this. So God, as we think about work ethic, we think about what it takes to make this calling go further. God, we just say, thank you. Just illuminate our creativity and motivate us and inspire us to realize that we can do this because you're with us through it all. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.